All right, thank you, Megan. It is time for my final thought. Soon enough, possibly later this morning, retired General Lloyd Austin will be announced as President-elect Joe Biden's choice to serve as Secretary of Defense, making him the first black person to lead the Pentagon. Now, this history-making appointment is a culmination of an impressive military career spanning 4 decades that saw him rack up a number of awards and a host of other firsts, including the first black general to command an Army division in combat, the first black vice chief of staff for the Army, and the first to oversee an entire theater of operations. This choice, along with the others he's already made, affirms our president-elect's stated commitment of having a cabinet that looks like America. And we should take a few brief moments to celebrate it. Now, I say brief purposefully, because in the last few weeks, we've seen several disturbing changes at the Pentagon enacted by the Trump administration. Key members of defense advisory boards purged, years of experience pushed out the door, replaced by former campaign staffers and advisors to the president, consultants and cronies whose qualifications seem to start and end with loyalty to Donald Trump. The moves have resulted in some Pentagon officials leaving in protest, one stating in his resignation letter that the installation of these political partisans has put the nation's safety and security at risk. That roaring sound you're hearing is the silence coming from the halls of Congress and Senate during all of this. The security of this nation should be a nonpartisan affair, paramount to each of our elected officials, yet we've heard nary a word on the subject from the soon-to-be opposition party. Which is more important, a team of seasoned professionals working in concert in defense of the country and her citizens, or the installation of sycophants bent on solidifying the whims and legacies of an outgoing president? You may not be able to stop it, but you can at least raise your voice against it. General Austin appears to be qualified, capable, and ready to handle whatever threats may come, but what he shouldn't have to take on is the dissension being created within the walls of the office he will be assuming. It's not fair to him, the career officials who have pledged service to country over party, nor the American people. We all deserve better. We're going to continue this conversation online. Keep it locked to WSA9, WSA9.com, and the app. Stay safe, stay beautiful. How about that Washington football team? Get up, DC.